Cheryl Burns. I'm the president of the, it's called 210 Gallery and Art Center is our full name. I want to thank you all for coming to this special event. And I would like to start with a little history of the organization. It actually started 10 years ago plus, 10 years plus. And it was called the Old School Art Center, and that was a building that was outside of town over by Chris's. And in October of 2022, we moved here. The building was a gift from the past congregation because they could no longer sustain this building. And we have made it our own over the last year and a half. We'll have our birthday celebration in October. And we are so excited to have all types of art here. And I would also like to acknowledge the board that I work with: Sue Foss, Missy Polster, Jennifer Fredrickson, Colleen Shotty, Amy Frazier, Nathan Frazier, and Tammy Jo Riedemann. And I want to thank her because she is the writer of the group. We are all a diverse group of board members. We have musicians and we have all kinds of art, but she's our writer person and has pushed for things like this. So I would like to introduce Tammy Jo Riedemann, who will be speaking with him. So, well, let's give a big round of applause for Kent. And I'm just going to ask Kent just a couple of questions on that, and then let him speak. And later, you can ask, speak with him also. Tammy, we're having a hard time hearing you.
That's because I didn't hit the mic in front of my face. Okay, is that better?
Yeah.
All right. And I put my glasses on so I can see. I tell you, all the things to do when you get older.
Questions, all right.
Questions, okay, yeah. Can you talk about the purpose of prayer for Ojibwe/Native Americans and how it can serve to inform even those who are not religious in a classic sense?
I don't want to speak just for Ojibwe, and also I don't like to speak for the Native people. I mostly can speak from my experience, and that way I don't cross any boundaries. That's the way I've survived in the Native cultures, by not transgressing what I think are legitimate boundaries. But I think there is a fundamental distinction between religion and spirituality. And there is a core spirituality among the Native people that has to do with, and I actually have a little piece I'm going to read that has to do with everything having the power of spirit inside of it. And even and this not being a theology per se, so much as a philosophy of life, permeates the way that the people see the world. And again, this is something that I'll brush against. But if it's a way of seeing the world, it just becomes part of your character. And the one thing I always like to point out is, if someone asked a group of kids to say, come, when we go to the high school and say, come on, let's all pray together, at least half of them are going to run for the exit. And I'm going to be among them. But when you're with the Native kids and they bring out the drum and they say, all right, everyone around the drum, it doesn't matter if they're gangbangers, it doesn't matter if they're alcoholics, it doesn't matter who they are, everyone comes with a sense of reverence and significance for that experience. And that sort of permeating of a spiritual presence in all events is there even beneath the residue of a lot of the cultural devastation that's taking place.
Can you speak about the Native American sense of humor? We read and see a lot about serious topics and tend to tiptoe when speaking with Native American people, if we speak with them at all.
I love the Native sense of humor, and it fits very well with our northern Minnesota or our Minnesota self-deprecating sense of humor. They always tend to, there's the crab in the bucket approach to things. You know, if someone gets a little bit uppity, they're going to be pulled down, and so there's a lot of jostling and jocularity, and if it were with a little more edge to it, you would call it passive aggressive, but I don't see it as that. It's just self-deprecating, mocking things a little bit, and the worst talk I ever gave, where I got myself in the most trouble ever, was it was in Ohio, I think, and I went down there. I hadn't spoken for years, and I went in there, and I told the people that they addressed me. They addressed me and introduced me as Dr. Kent Nerburn, because I got a doctorate in philosophy, or a doctorate in theology, and so I picked up the mic and said, and there were some Indian women in the audience, so they were loaded for bear. They did not like the idea of a white guy coming to talk about Indian stuff, which wasn't my intention, but anyway, and I said to them, I know that thing about Nerburn on the reservation when they tried. So someone introduced me as doctor, and some guy stood up and said, "Hey, what do you do, man? Take out appendixes?" And that was sort of Native humor. And of course, the women in the audience, those Indian women, were just disgusted with me, and they came after me and terrified me and sent me home with my tail between my legs. But that's the kind of way the humor is. And I think if you read Neither Wolf nor any of the three books, but Neither Wolf nor Dog, and the Wolf at Twilight especially, Grover really is the man who has the Indian sense of humor. And on a broader note, humor, if you can laugh with other people, then you're somewhere inside of their world. And I think that to me is what mattered. Once I can have fun with the Native people and laugh with them, and they laugh with me, then I know that I'm going somewhere, because they're very, very humorous, but very, very droll. And you said the humor sometimes around the corner from what they're saying. And I can't explain it more than that. I just say, take a look at Neither Wolf nor Dog, or take a look at The Wolf at Twilight, or the stretch in The Girl Who Sang to the Buffalo, where Grover gets talking about Jumbo before Jumbo actually has. Jumbo stands up and speaks out and declares himself differently. But you'll see through that's Indian humor through and through. And I love it. It's just a very casual, self-deprecating, low-level sense of irony.
What can Native Americans teach us about resistance? What can white people understand and learn about Native American resilience and resistance?
Well, again, this is asking me to speak out of court. I really can't speak for Native people in this regard. But I do know that in terms of resilience, when you've been here for 250 years, people have been trying to destroy you, eradicate you through acculturation, through assimilation, through actual annihilation and physical destruction, and you know how to survive. There's something about resilience in there that we all can learn. I think a lot of it, and again, here I feel comfortable giving these answers, but I'll try there. One of the things is a lot of the resilience for the Native culture is kept by the women. And the women are they're the keepers of tradition in some way, because they haven't had to be adapted. They've kept their motherly, grandmotherly roles and haven't had to change those in the way that they raised children, in the way that they taught children. And the men have had to adapt in many ways to contemporary culture. And you try to hold on to both sides of your own ways and the modern ways. but I think a lot of it is just keeping the faith, and in whatever sense that is, keeping the culture, keeping the traditions, keeping the rituals. And again, I'll mention at the end one of the men who said something that I think is very important about ritual. Maybe I'll mention it now, and then I'll just skip it in the talk. You've got this whole issue here of the kids wanting, and this is something that mattered to me a lot. The kids in the Asco Finlayson School District who wanted to have a drum group, and they wanted to wear their own, there's kids who want to wear their regalia in graduation, and it's seen as somehow, it was put down as a religious act. I don't even know what the argument was against it, but it brought to mind a man who was a really significant person in my life. His name was Tommy Stillday, and he was the spiritual leader of this little town of Panema, way up at the top of Red Lake, 40 miles on a dirt road, ending in Panema. And I'd taken some kids up there to talk to Tommy and just have them sort of experience the traditional elder. And he was talking to them, and there was one kid who came along, and all the way up, it was a cold, rainy day, and snowy, a little blustery, and the road wasn't real good. And all the way up, I'm worried about the driving because I'm driving a van, and he's going on and on about all his, the spiritual powers in the lake, and these little people that I forget what they were called, but little people live on the other side of the lake, and he's making all these grand claims for spirituality that he didn't have. I mean, he was just a high school kid and a bit of a clown. But when we got up and started talking to Tommy J, and let Tommy J talk to us, this fellow he kept on talking and raising his hand and talking about all the spiritual knowledge he had. And when we got done, I went up to Tommy and said, I'm afraid that, I'll call him Keith, that I'm afraid that Keith was a little out of line, and I'm sorry for what he said. He said, no, don't be upset, because he's just like a kid he's like someone wearing a suit of clothes that are too big for him. He said, it's good that he says these things, because he's using the right words, because what's on your lips eventually makes its way to the heart. And I thought that was a very profound statement. And that, when I look at these young people wanting to wear their regalia, the ones who want the drum group, the present, they're trying to wear a suit of clothes that may not be something that they entirely fit into. Maybe they never will, but it's an aspirational thing on their part, and that's where the resilience comes from. As far as resistance, I don't even know what to say about that. I give up. I would just be making up things by saying it. But I do notice the resilience and that way of trying to hold on to culture by acting the roles and trying to live inside the roles, and hopefully you can inhabit them by the use of the language, by the use of the traditions, by the use of the regalia. It's just a very powerful thing when you see what they're trying to do.
I know we all want to listen to Kent do some more speaking and reading. I'm just going to ask him a couple questions to do with the writers group, and then I'm going to step off of it.
I might have said everything I was going to say, but...
No, I hope not. Okay. We're trying to... Okay, the other question is, I've read in multiple places that you do not like talking about yourself, yet you have a lot of important things to say. Is that why you write?
Yes.
That's easy. How reflective is your writing of yourself?
How what?
How reflective?
Well, the best line ever was given by my mother. My mother was very plain spoken, and she once said, "I wish you were more like the people the person in your books." I said, "Thanks, Mom." No, it is reflective of my best self. I mean, one of the reasons I turned to writing and turned to the arts is because you can present your best self in there. We don't always get to it. In our relationships, Certainly driving down the highway when you're cut off by someone in another car, your best self does not come out inside of your vehicle there. And in general, writing allows me to be the person that I want to be. And in many ways, it may not be all that different from those kids trying to wear outfits that don't quite fit them. I'm not always the person that I would like to be, but if you live inside a value system, it's going to shine through in various different places. And so writing is, for me, the word is scary, but I'm using it. It's a ministry. That's been my job. It's my way of paying my rent on earth. And to do that, there are places I've written some things that, if you truly read them, you'd say, that doesn't sound like you. That's worse than your mom even thinks you are. But no, in my writing, I try to reflect the best of who I am, the best of who I want to be, and the best of what I think I can share with other people.
We are trying to build a writers group here, and there's, for several reasons. I think that it's inspirational and it's supportive and it's entertaining, and we're kind of struggling with it. From whom do you get feedback when you're writing in that? Do you have other people critique or approve?
I'm far too susceptible to criticism. I can't let anyone see anything until I'm done. And I work things to death. So, if I let anyone, I may sometimes make the mistake by working things to death of perhaps killing something that should have been left at an earlier stage. But I can't let anyone read my work along the way. I wish I could. And I wish I were able to write a draft, hand that draft to someone and say, here, what do you think of this? But I can't. I have to get it to where I think it's completely done, and it's a fully formed presentation of my ideas, my thoughts, the best of who I can be in that particular document. Then I give it to someone. And that's a dangerous thing, because first of all, if it's someone you know, well, even if it's someone you don't know, but especially if it's someone you know, you're looking for the flare of the eye, the flare of the nostrils, the twitch of the eyes, the lack of interest in it, and you confuse yourself. You can confuse their response to what you're writing. With their response to you as a person, and you can say, I'm worth nothing. I'm just a newt. I'm just a mote on the face of the earth because this person didn't like my writing. If I sent it out as it was going along, that wouldn't be the case. And I don't recommend my approach to doing things, but it's just, I've been a solitary writer, a solitary thinker, a solitary sculptor when I was sculpting. And so that's just the way that I learned to do it. And like I said, it's, I wouldn't recommend it, but that's been my style.
So I'm going to get off the stage here and let Kent talk for a while, and then at the end, I just got a couple of kind of housekeeping things I want to tell you about when he's all done.
All right, so, this watching me after all the effort that we put into it, maybe the effort will continue because I'm not getting up. I'm going to try this for a bit. I didn't expect to be working without a lectern, and I actually like to be doing things sitting down like this is much more informal, and I prefer to do this informally. And I really didn't prepare a formal talk because I wanted to make it just more conversational. I appreciate you for starting it that way. And but I did write a few notes because, I think those of us who've got a few miles on us and now these days are looking at a couple of presidential candidates who have some limitations in their presentation of self. And I have each of those. And the one is, as our poor Mr. Biden does, I can't find words very often. I'm digging for them. Where is it? When I I can't find it. And so I sympathize with him, and I sympathize with Mr. Trump, who if he doesn't have something in front of him, he goes way off the rails and goes into the weeds and disappears. And I would do that if I didn't put a few notes in front of me. So I will be looking at those periodically, but not because I don't want to talk to you personally. Just a little reason for why I've got some documents out here that aren't hidden behind the lectern, like they would normally have been. But, you know, when Missy asked me to do this, and she said it was a writer's group, I thought, well, I probably should talk about writing and talk about the arts. And I'm perfectly willing to do that. We did a little bit of it there. But ultimately, you know, when you get to my stage in life, and you get a public forum, it feels necessary to speak about the things that matter. And one of the lessons that I learned from working with the Native people is to look at life as seasons. And you know, and that sounds like an easy trope, but we're raised to look at our lives, or we live our lives almost as a straight line, starting, you know, with childhood and adult and becoming, and then you reach that point of productivity and fecundity and your good earning years and everything, and then you gradually become vestigial and you fade from the stage, or you should. And but that isn't the Native way. The Native way is to look at each of the seasons of life as having a certain significance. And only the person who gets to the fourth stage of life has seen the other three stages of life. So it's incumbent upon the person, the elder, which the word seems too big and I don't wear it comfortably, but it's true that you have to speak what it is that you know. So rather than talking about writing per se, I'd like to talk more about what I've learned in the course of my journey. And because the fact is, I didn't really become a writer because I love to write. I'm good at writing, but it wasn't my first love. My first love was sculpture. But it's now become my job as a writer to tell the stories and tell the truth that I understand about life, and because it's my moral obligation. I've always looked at myself more as a teacher than an entertainer. And so when I write, my job is to teach. And I try to embed the teaching inside of story, because as one Native man said to me, and I've always used this as one of the mantras I work by, is always teach by stories, because stories lodge deep in the heart. So I try to teach by stories. I don't try to teach by analysis. I don't try to teach by philosophical ramblings. I tell stories, and I tell stories as not from on high. You find very few of my books, only Letters to My Son, the first book that I did after when I started writing, and then the last one, Voices in the Stones, has a few sections in it where I turn and face you and tell you what I think, what I know, or what I've tried to learn. And because Voices in the Stones I looked upon kind of as my elder book, as an elder book, and I was going to tell you in one part of it, although there are three parts to it, I wanted you to know what it is I've learned, so I'm standing and facing you. But in almost all my other books, you'll find that they're written in the first person, because I think the first person is something that allows you to identify with a writer. If you get in the car with a writer, and metaphorically speaking, and you like who or how he's driving, you're going to stay with him. But it's good to be in that car rather than looking at a map of the highway. So I write from the first person and put you next to me, and I say, come on along, let's look at the world together, and let's see what we see, and I'll give you my thoughts about it. And so we are, in fact, fellow travelers in my writing. And so that's really what I've tried to do. And in the case of my life journey, I came upon the Native world. And I came upon the Native world in an interesting fashion that I won't go into, but it was an attempt to modify or learn something more about the sculptural task that I set for myself. I was a sculptor in wood. And anyway, the opportunity came to teach at Red Lake and to run a an oral history program at Red Lake in northern Minnesota. And I took it because I needed some work. My wife and I had moved to northern Minnesota. I needed a job. Sculpture was not working for me. I loved it. I also had a certain failure nerve in some works that I did and didn't feel good about it. So the opportunity came to teach on the reservation. And what they wanted was a history teacher. And I thought, well, I don't want to be a history teacher in a traditional sense because I know that I'd be imposing my Euro-American intellectual overlay. So what I want to do instead is something that we had done, my wife and I had done in running a newspaper in North Minneapolis years before, and that was just go out and talk to people. I wanted to get their stories. So I proposed taking the students out to interview the tribal elders. And the end result was a book that became, it's traveled around the country, and Neither Wolf Nor Dog actually is a result of this book having traveled around the country, but it's memories of the Red Lake Ojibwe people. And so that's really where I'd like to start. So the year is 1989. I've just gotten this job. I'm told I'm supposed to, I've spoken beyond my capabilities, and I said I would like to run an oral history program. I'd like to take the students out to talk to the elders. So there I am we're living just outside of Bemidji, and Red Lake is 30 miles north of Bemidji, and it might be 1,000 miles away in the minds of most Bemidjiites who have never even been there. And I'm driving up this little road, and they said you should talk to a woman named Dolores Cloud, because she will help you find the elders that you can talk to. And I'm driving up there. I haven't been on the reservation before. I'm scared. I'm going through the woods. I'm in over my head. I don't know anything about Indian people. My only experience with Indian people growing up in the Twin Cities was, buckle shoe pilgrims and making turkeys on my hand and feather headdresses of chicken feathers and little red-tipped rubber bow and arrows. That was my experience with the Native people. So here I am, and I'm going up to talk to real Indians, and I'm going to do an oral history project. Well, so I drive up. They say, Dolores is at the Tribal Cultural Center. So I have a vision of the Tribal Cultural Center, and I'm driving up the road, and they say, oh, it's behind this building, behind the school, and here's an old construction shack. And it's got Tribal Cultural Center written on it in sort of sloppy painting, dripping paint, and door's half open. So I knock on the door, beat my head in, and there's a woman sitting there, an older woman, she'd been a little older than I was, and a young girl, and they're beading. They've got beads on the table, and they're handing them from one to another, and the girl's handing the beads to the older woman, who's then putting them on strings. And I put my head in and said, hello, are you Dolores Cloud? Nothing. And I said, and I stepped in. I thought maybe she didn't hear me, so I walked in and said, hi, my name's Kent Nerburn, and I'm here. I'm looking for Dolores Cloud. Nothing. So I walked up closer, and I don't know what's going on. I put my hands out to shake her hand, and I say, hi, Dolores. My name's Kent Nerburn, and I've been hired by the school district to do this oral history project. And she looks up at me and says, if you're here to do another one of those goddamn anthropology projects, you can just get on your pony and ride. Dark woods, far from home. I backed out of the door and said, what have I done? What have I gotten myself into? Well, I got myself into it. So I go to the school, and a few days later, the school starts, and I've got students. I don't know what to do. I've got a list of students, actually. And I say, I got to do this right. I've got to figure out how to do this right. And one of the students whose name they'd given me, and I said, could you take me around the reservation? Maybe I can learn something about how to do this right. So she said, yeah, you can come up to my house and you can pick me up and we'll go for a ride around where I live. And she was in Panema, this little town I talked about, that's 40 miles north of Red Lake, or north of the town of Red Lake. And bear in mind, this is the most traditional of the towns. Yeah, it's still convenience stores and junk cars and stuff, but it's way, way north of anywhere, a dead end. And when you look at Red Lake, it's like a figure eight, and there's this little point of land that almost touches where the two parts of the lake come together, or on the top and the bottom, upper and lower Red Lake. And so I drive up to Panema, and they told me where her house was. And, I thought back to what had I done wrong with Dolores? Well, what I realized is I had, I walked in with a sense of privilege. I thought my status had given me the right to entree. I thought that my good-heartedness had given me the right to entree. And what I'd actually done is stomped out of their shore like a modern-day Christopher Columbus, planted my flag and said, I'm here to help. And I said, I'm not doing it this time. So I got up to the house where this girl lived, and I got out of the car, and I just walked in. Instead of going up to the door, I leaned on my car fender and just sat there. And it was a split-entry house, it was a reservation kind of house with torn screens and windows, and there's a little kid's head start popping up like an advent calendar all over the place. And, and pretty soon I just stood there, just said, leaned back, and I had my leaned against the car, and pretty soon the mother came out and came up to me, and I said I wanted to take your daughter, and her daughter said she'd show me the city, or the town such as it is, and the city certainly isn't, and she let her go, but she sent the little brother along just to make sure everything was okay. And we went around Panema, and she taught me a whole bunch of things about her world as a kid hasn't. And I looked at that and said, think about how it would be if a man, a 40-year-old man, came up to your house, said he wanted to take your daughter somewhere, and just stayed out of the car instead of coming up and presenting himself and knocking at the door. But I did the right thing by their standards, the wrong thing by mine. And that was just one of the first lessons, that there were different ways of seeing the world, and that I didn't know that not one wasn't better than the other. They were different, they had different values, they had different core ways of interacting. And let me give you another example. This is maybe one of my favorites. This requires nimbly stands up. I could have done more changes, but I thought all right, now, pick one. You, sir. Samantha, look at it, shaking my hand, I appreciate it. It's good. That's central casting. Here's one. In the book, The Wolf at Twilight, I've gone and met with a man named Orv. Orv was a good man, and Orv was he'd been in the boarding schools, and he was a very soft-spoken man, and we had, and when we'd all talk to him and left, and I could see that Dan and Grover were a little disgusted with it. And they said, well, you don't seem to understand that there are snakes and there are bears, and you don't quite know much about prejudice. The difference between prejudice and bias. Those weren't their terms. I said, well, what do you mean? So let me read you about this. Okay, where are we? The tone of the card lightened sufficiently that I had decided to pursue the handshake comment that Dan had made so offhandedly a few minutes before. What do you mean about the handshake, I asked, about how it showed that I'm prejudiced? I didn't say it showed you were prejudiced. I said it showed that you missed some things. Like what? He gave Bronson, that's the little dog that he's got, a final piece of fry bread and wipe the grease on his pants leg. Let's go back down the trail a bit. You remember when we left Orv? Well, I remember there was a lot of joking and he gave us this fine vintage Kool-Aid. You remember that you shook his hand? Yeah, right, like I always do. Do you remember anything about it? Yeah, it was nothing in particular. It was kind of soft, I guess. Here, he said, reaching his hand across to me. Shake my hand. I took his hand in my own. His grip was soft and loose. What can you tell me about my handshake, he said. It's soft, like Orv's. What you white guys call a dead fish, right? You said it, I didn't. Well, yours is hard. It's like a vice. It's what we call a white man power grip. I looked at him quizzically. That's right, Dan said. I was watching you with Orv. You gave me the white man power grip. It was just a normal handshake, the way my daddy taught me. Look them in the eye, shake their hand firmly to let them know that you're there. That's my point. It's the way your daddy taught you, but it's not the way my daddy taught me. When I shake your hand, I hold it real loose. I keep my touch soft, just so we can just touch each other. I don't want to grab you hard. That would be like trying to own you, to control you. I don't need to lock you down to let you know I'm there. That's the way my daddy taught me. It's the way Orv's daddy taught him. See, this is just one of those things, Dan continued. Since you're culture one, you guys make the rules. Because your guys' handshakes came from some armor knights gripping each other's arms so hard so you couldn't reach for your swords. We're supposed to do the same thing, but that's not our way. You feel my handshake and you think it's weak, but it's not weak. It makes you think we're soft, like some hard handshake makes you a man. But a hard handshake doesn't make you a man. All a hard handshake does is keep someone from pulling free. I don't want to keep someone from pulling free. That's not showing respect, it's showing power. Real strength is letting a person keep their freedom. That's quite a hefty bunch of conclusions to draw from a handshake, I said. No, it's not. A handshake is the first meeting between people. It's like the doorstep to your heart. How you do it means a lot. A perfect example, again, of we shake hands, we do it the way our daddies taught us. And is there anything better about our way? No. Is there anything better about their way? No. It's just different ways of understanding. So those were two simple examples of things that are different, but aren't really important and significant. But there are things that I learned in working with the Native people that I think are different, that are important, and are significant. I'll give you two examples, and because I think they're both kind of significant. I mean, one requires a bit of reading. Again, I hope you don't mind me reading to you, but most people like to be read to, so I'll do it. Anyways, it was when I was traveling out west at Fort Totten in North Dakota, right outside of Devil's Lake. And there's a fort there. I wanted to visit this fort, and because the fort was considered to be one of the best preserved of the traditional forts of the Northern Plains. And it's not a stockade kind of fort. It's more of buildings around a parade ground area, and it's beautifully manicured. It's got trees behind it. It's a beautiful looking place, and it had been converted to a boarding school. And that was one of the reasons that I wanted to go there, is because the more time I spent among the Native people, the more I realized that the boarding school experience was absolutely critical in who they have become and what has happened to them in the broadest cultural sense. So I wanted to get a feel for this boarding school. I wanted to walk in these rooms, see, hear, echo, see the names of the kids carved on the desks, see how it was. And I was lucky because it was the end of the year. And the place was closed, but there was a janitor or some person that worked the area who said, yeah, you can go in, it's open, just go into these rooms. So I went through them all. It was very haunting. Like I said, seeing the kids' names carved in the desks, seeing, they left it sort of for tourists, I guess, seeing the writing on the board, seeing the chair with the little dunce cap next to it, and thinking that these were where these kids went to school. This was what their life was like. And it made me very reflective. And so I went into town into his spirit lake, yeah, I guess it's Spirit Lake there on the other side of the lake, and there was this old cafe there. It was a cinder block cafe with plywood on the windows, and I went in, I was going to get something to eat, and there was a guy sitting in there, only one man, he was an Indian guy, well into his 80s, and he was sitting by himself, and for reasons I was not at all characteristic of me, I asked him if I could sit with him. And so I sat down with him, and nice guy. We got talking, and he was talking about what it was like in Devil's Lake, how he was moved out of his house because all the mold was creeping into his house, and other problems he was having. And so let me pick it up from there. We shared a few pleasantries about the water level in Devil's Lake, and then I asked him whether he had gone to the boarding school before Todd. Oh yeah, he said matter-of-factly, I went there. I learned good English. I learned good Christian. But I'm no longer myself. I'm somebody else. His comment cut me to the quick. I had seen firsthand the cultural devastation wrought in the Indian communities by the imposition of our Euro-American values and culture, and I had watched the shadows of painful memories shudder the eyes of the elders on Red Lake when the students had asked them about the boarding schools. This man, for all his placid manner and sanguine outlook, was the very embodiment of what we as a nation had done to the native peoples who had stood in our path as we pushed our way across the continent. Yeah, things have really changed, he went on. The old ways, the way I was raised, they're gone now. They took them away from us. He looked away and stared into the distance. I touched something deep in him. My grandma, he said, she could talk to the animals. She liked to hang clothes out on the line, stand out in the sun and the wind. She used to talk to the meadowlarks. They'd sit on the fence posts, and she would sometimes laugh and say things to them. I remember one day she got angry and threw a rock at one of them. I heard her scolding it as it flew away. A little neighbor girl died the next day. Grandma must not have liked what the meadowlark had to say. He took a sip of his coffee and gazed past me almost as if I wasn't there. I guess we forgot their language, or maybe they just don't want to talk to us now. I'm sorry, I said. I can think of nothing more appropriate to say. He hardly seemed to be listening. There were lots of buffalo around in those days, he went on. My grandpa used to tell me that when something was bothering me, I should go out and sit by them. Don't get too close, he'd say, because they can be ornery. Just be near them. Their spirits are very calm. They will understand you, and their presence will help you. I looked in his ancient ruby eyes. They were glistening with half-forgotten memories. They were our teachers, he said. The buffalo would always form a circle around one of their own who was sick or wounded. They showed us how to be protectors and how to care for the weak. The Creator put that knowledge into them so they could share it with us. He lifted his coffee slowly to his lips. I missed the old ways. The world was different then. I don't know if the world has changed or if we have. His voice faded almost to a whisper. He was moving inside himself. I could feel it was time to leave. Can I pay for your coffee? I asked. He smiled and nodded. I left a few bills on the table and shook his hand. His grip was soft and distant, as if he wasn't even there. When I was a child, my parents gave me a little black puppy. I remember holding her in my lap in the back seat of the family car as we drove home, thinking this was the greatest gift, no, the greatest miracle any boy could ever receive. I named her Boots because she had white paws. It was a simple name, without cleverness or guile, but it was my name, my choice, and Boots was going to be my dog. For the next 14 years, Bootsy, as we came to call her, was my constant companion. She slept with me, walked with me, waited for me when I returned home from school. She had a crooked smile and a sidewinding gait that made her seem almost comical as she ambled up to me wagging her whole back end after I returned from some adventure from which she had been excluded. Like every child's dog, she was the greatest dog in the world. As I neared the end of high school, Bootsy's body began to give out. Our nighttime walks became shorter and less frequent. Her steps slowed. She developed a limp. Soon she could only go a few hundred yards, but her loyalty would not let her stay behind. She would follow as best she could. Then when the walking became too difficult for her, she would lift her old gray muzzle and stare at me through clouded eyes, wagging her tail gamely as if in apology. I would pick her up and carry her, laboring under her weight and feeling the heaving, uneven struggles of her shallow, labored breathing. Eventually the day came, as it always does, when she looked up at me with an expression that said, "I can't do it anymore." Something passed between us, and I was called to that moment when a boy must become a man. The next day I took her to the vet, and with tears streaming down my cheeks, held her tight as she shivered and pressed against me while the vet injected the substance into her leg that turned her from my living, breathing closest companion into an inert mass that lay lifeless in my arms. In that instant, something deep inside me died that would never live again. In a small way, it was the same thing that had died in that old man when we imposed our language and our Western way of thinking upon him and his people. It had something to do with innocence and something to do with faith. I was raised to believe that we humans are the apex of creation, made, as my Sunday school classes had taught me, in the image and likeness of God, the only element of creation possessed of an eternal soul. It was not a deeply held or well-thought-out conviction. It was just the way I had learned to understand the world. But as I held my old dog in my arms and watched the light fade from her trusting, caring eyes, that conviction drained out of me as surely as the life drained out of her aging, trembling body. I knew in that moment that I could never again embrace a belief that told me her spiritual presence and worth were inferior to mine. Her heart had been greater, her spirit purer. She had taught me about love, about faithfulness, about steadfastness and gentle caring. Her eyes had held a consciousness and understanding that was equal to mine. No one could tell me that she didn't have a soul. The residue of that betrayal, and yes, it was a betrayal, never left me. What I heard in the old man's words and felt in his sad, wistful manner was the same betrayal, but of a far greater order of magnitude. He had been raised in a world where the animals and plants, indeed the very seasons and the earth itself, all contained lessons that were there for us to acknowledge and embrace. In their own way, and in their expression of their own being, they were wiser than we were. They were the teachers we needed to acknowledge. Luther Standinger, the great Lakota chief, put it succinctly. Everything was possessed of personality, only different from us in form. Knowledge was inherent in all things. The world was a library, and its books were the stones, leaves, grass, brooks, and birds and animals that shared, alike with us, the storms and blessings of earth. This is the world my friend knew, the world the old man remembered, the world I wished I had been given when I was growing up. I imagined a childhood alive with this kind of understanding, where the world is a vibrant, living place filled with lessons in the land and its creatures, where buffalo teach us about protection and calm by the way they surround the weak and firm in times of crisis, where porcupines show us the humble use of strength and personal power, and where our dogs teach us about faithfulness by their steadfast and unwavering love. Had I been granted this way of understanding, my old dog's death would not have cast me adrift spiritually. It would have made my faith stronger and filled me with reverence and gratitude for the gift she had given me. She would have lived inside of me as a mentor and a teacher, not as a wound that would never be healed. Our Western way has sent us in a bad direction, where our dominance as a species is presumed without question. Whether we see ourselves as the image and likeness of God or the high point of evolution, we still see ourselves as the apex, the culmination. Everything else is lesser. Soon enough, we lose the heart to be listeners and learners. Without thinking, we reduce the world around us to a series of objects. We do not see the thou in our fellow creatures, only the it. How I wish we were raised with the constant awareness of the Spirit in all living creatures, where the world is seen as our teacher rather than as a template on which we can impose our will. How I wish we as a people had learned this from the old man and his people instead of trying to kill it in them. Perhaps it is not yet too late for us to embrace these lessons. It requires only that we begin to see the world and all that it contains as acting upon us, rather than us acting upon it, and to cultivate the fine attention and mindfulness that comes from seeing everything as alive with its own inherent presence. It means learning to listen before speaking, to observe before knowing, to recognize that we came last in creation and that all that was here before us had its own rules and its own knowledge. It is the way of reverence and humility, of seeing the thou in all creation. And we must learn this, or the earth itself may teach it to us. And like the meadowlark that upset the old man's grandmother, what the earth has to say may be something we don't want to hear. That's another one of the many lessons I learned. I'll tell you one more. This one is One of my favorites. Favorite's a strange word to use, but this. I'd like to reuse this to show people something of really profound significance. What do you got? Here we go. This is the way it came to me. Towel. Sock, hospital sock. There's probably a second one in here. Okay, I better organize. Pair of gloves. Standard pillowcases. Handkerchiefs. Bath towel. Couple of combs. Bar soap. And the other side. I got a call from a woman when we were living back in northern Minnesota, and she said that her mom had died. And I never got any calls from any of the Native people, it just didn't happen. And she said, we'd like you to be at her burial. And this woman's name was Rose. And Rose had been my assistant in taking the children, the students, on our field trips. We needed to have a woman as a chaperone for the girls. And so Rose had been assigned to me. Rose was about my age, but she felt like a mother to me. She just had that character of sort of maternal presence. And we got along great. There was, as we're talking about humor, she and I just laughed and laughed and laughed together. And whereas I was trying to keep the kids in order, all of her, when we were traveling, all she had to do was look at them. Oh, no, and they just settled right in. So anyway, Rose and I we've not seen each other much over the years. I'd seen her at a local gas station one day. She was staying in the truck, and I asked her why she wasn't getting out when her daughter or whoever was with her was getting in, going into the station. She said, well, I can't walk anymore. And that was the last dealings we'd had with each other. So then, however many months, probably months later, I get this call. And so I go to the funeral, or go to the burial. It wasn't appropriate for me to be at the funeral, but we went to the burial. It was out on a point in Panema, again, the same little town, and up on a hill overlooking the lake. And they have a traditional way of burial where you see all these little things that look like long dog houses where they build them over the graves of the people, and then when they put food and things of significance in front of in the little hole in the front of this burial house. And when the house gradually falls apart and disintegrates, that's when it's figured the spirit is released. So I'm in this burial ground of all these little houses, and they bring, and Rose's coffin is brought up. The kids in the back of a pickup truck. They take her out of the pickup truck and then take the casket out of the pickup truck, put it in a hole that they had probably dug themselves, and fill it up with dirt. And everyone pushes a little dirt in. Even the older folks are given a shovel or something here, just put a little bit in. So everyone buries her. And then a sheet was put over the top, and there were stones and things put around it, and then plastic flowers over the top. And I stayed way in the back. It's not mine to be there. And the daughter comes up to me afterwards and gives me this bag. Okay, and what am I doing? I said, Rose wanted you to have this. And so I take it, and I don't what to do. Do I open it? Whatever, you know. And I left, and I got out, drove away, and I'm driving home. And I stopped and opened it up, and I look at it. And I see all this and said, "What is all of this? Are they symbolic? Is there some great literary merit to this? Is they all supposed to mean something?" And then it hit me. This was, Rose wanted to give me a gift. And this is what she could gather in her hospital bed. It was what she was near her. And this giving of the gift, this was what she had for me. And this tradition of giving gifts of significance is so deep in the Native people. They always give gifts. And we don't always understand. We expect gifts. But in the best of times, when a child was given a ceremony of some sort, like invent an equivalent of a confirmation or something, you don't give them gifts. They give gifts away. And this whole tradition of gift giving was just one more example of the kind of thing that I found myself learning from being around the Native people. And I mean, there's so many different other stories I could tell you about. I could tell you about a man named Philip when I was at a gathering out in Sioux Falls. His dad was a man that I met only passing in Portland. He was a Christian Indian, you know, and evangelical, very, very odd combination, but not uncommon. And his son Philip, I'd gone to this house, I invited this house where there were a group of Native people and white people, one of whom was his son. And this was months afterwards, and we hadn't been together. We were all trying to talk about his dad, Richard, and say good things about him, and what a good man he was, how much we miss him. And Philip, you could see, Philip had a checkered relationship with his dad. And so it was all falling on deaf ears, and we didn't know what to say to him because it was clearly brooding and clearly hurt a little bit. And so there was one man that actually, he was a Dakota minister. If I remember correctly, he was actually a Lutheran minister. He was Dakota, that was his thing. And he said, Philip, you're lucky. And Philip said, what do you mean I'm lucky? And he said, well, you have to understand, we all must grieve. It's what makes us human, because it speaks of love. It's necessary and right to grieve for a father, a mother, an aunt, or an uncle. Because we love them differently, we grieve for them differently. I feel sorry for children who haven't known their father because they can't grieve for his death or for the death of their grandparents. They miss part of being human. You're lucky you get to grieve for your father. I don't know how to think this way. I don't see this way of thinking. But these are the kind of values that I found everywhere in dealing with the Native people. And I could tell you my thinking about what I've gotten from it all, but I'll best tell it with Dan. I'll let Dan say these words, and I'll close with them. He said that, we Indian people know many things. We know how to wrap our arms around a larger family. We know how to be poor without thinking we should be rich. We value our elders because we know that they're the keepers of the memories. And we value our children because we know that they carry the hope for the future. We know how to honor the mysteries of life without always thinking that we're supposed to solve them. And we know how to keep the sacred on our lips because we know that what is on the lips eventually makes its way to the heart. These are good things. They're good things for everyone. They are the gifts the Creator gave us. We want to share them. And your people need to listen. They need to learn how to listen. Once having come across the Native experience and Native ways, even though things are hard to see because they're so hidden under the cultural treatise of what is left of some strong and powerful cultures and has had to adapt to our American way of life, beneath all of these is a wisdom that if you take away the surface things you can't see, is deep and abiding. These are not a minority group, another minority group. They're the elder cultures on our land. And to me, my goal has been, as a writer, to tell the stories. Like I said, I learned my lesson. Teach my stories, because stories lodge close, deep in the heart. Tell them in the first person. So when people come along with you, when you write in the first person, tell them with images. Tell them with sensory data. Don't tell them with analysis. And make them so that they can be heard as well as thought. So this has been my task, and I always like to end with the quote that I think says it all for me, and that is what Chief Sitting Bull said, and I don't think the words have ever been said any better. Here's Sitting Bull, who's seen his people destroyed by the U.S. government, gets together, sitting around with the treaty makers and said, come, let us put our minds together and see what kind of lives we can make for our children. And that's what I try to do. That's what I hope I can do through my writing. So, thank you.
Okay, just a couple of announcements here. There are treats in the outer room, and Kent, I believe, has stayed for a little while too.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah, he's got books for sale in the back, and we'll be able to talk to you.
Should we take a couple questions, or should we let
Yes,
people
yes,
get out of Dodge?
we certainly could take some questions.
I will tell you that one of the things that I learned, again, working with Native people, is that we white speakers, we can hold you almost forever because you're polite. You won't get up and leave. And if you're with a bunch of Native people, they vote with their feet. They're done. They've heard enough out of you. Or I don't need anything else to get up and leave. And that's fine. That doesn't work real well in a classroom, but it happens. But anyway, I don't want to hold you in your seat. So let's take two questions, all right? If there are any. If not, yes.
There's a current fashion, maybe is the right word, for preparation of land acknowledgement statements. And for the ones that and it's a laudable concept, but for the ones that I've seen, they seem to miss the mark, and I'm curious about your thoughts.
I have not sensed that they've missed the mark, and because, first of all, I'm not comfortable with public prayer. I just am not. It's just not that kind of guy. And so public things that become, that have this sort of forced sanctity about them, a sacredness, I'm not comfortable with. I think they're laudable, I admire them, and I've got no problem with them. But you'd have to tell me more about what it is that doesn't sit well with you.
It seems to me that many of them are transactional. It's a recognition that others before us held the land, but it doesn't convey a sense of reverence for that land.
Yeah, and I don't know what to say. It is, so you're saying that, transactional is a good word. So you're saying it doesn't have a sense of reverence, it doesn't have a sense of gratitude, it doesn't have a sense of apology? What? I'm not sure what, I'm not challenging you, it's just I'm not sure what the right way to do it would be. An acknowledgement, all I can think of is, I remember more than once having Native people say to me, all we wish you'd do is say that you're sorry. And so I sort of take anything that hints of saying that we're sorry as a good thing, or hints of acknowledging that this land is real. I guess maybe what I would say to that is, making a land acknowledgement is a broad statement. But let's say, okay, who lived under this church building? What was their house like? What sort of people lived here? If you can bring it down in a land acknowledgement to making real the very physical place that you're in, rather than the abstraction of we are living on land that was once owned by someone else. Yes, this is Ojibwe land, but who was the Ojibwe family that lived here? What were their families like? Something that resonates with us. But again, what's on the lips makes its way to the heart. This may be the best we can do, is try to acknowledge something when we're confused, we feel guilty, but we know it's not ours to deal with. And as Dan once said, I don't want you to feel guilty, I want you to feel responsible. And maybe that's as far as we can go, is to feel responsibility. And I know that's a fumbling answer, but I never really thought of the issue before. When people do it, I say, good work, go on. So, bad answer, the best I got. So, one more, and we're done. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
So, one of my favorite books of yours is the Peace Prayer of St. Francis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I read that quite a bit. So I have a two-part question for you. Number one, what possessed you to dress up as Santa Claus to go into an inner city area where you're confronted by black gangs? And then my second question is, what do you think would happen if you dressed up as Santa Claus and I can't remember if it's section 33 or 34 in Gas Lake, but it's kind of a bad spot. What would happen if you dressed up as Santa Claus and went into that part of Gas Lake?
Interesting question. I fell into that Santa thing only because, God, how did it actually start? I ended up getting a Santa suit that I just recently gave to a Mexican family in Oregon, not a Mexican community in Oregon, because I couldn't do it anymore. No one wanted me to do it. There are 50 Santas on every corner trying to give things out to people. And so what I did was I got this, I don't remember how I started, but I started by going to nursing homes in northeast Minneapolis. And I saw that people's whole attitude changed. Santa was he was non-sectarian. He was not only non-sectarian, he was non-spiritual tradition. Everyone loved Santa. And it was a chance to reach out and generate something with kids, with people, because I've always been kind of an outsider. I kind of like being an outsider, and in this case it was a chance to become an insider, or an outsider who could go into any place. And the place I went, in North Minneapolis, it was probably, my wife and I were living in North Minneapolis, and we were writing a newspaper in North Minneapolis. And I had come to feel that Santa was invulnerable, but that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was that Santa was, he opened hearts. And I just had an opportunity to go down there. There were little nursing homes down there, and I just trusted that neighborhood. And surprisingly, when I stopped doing the Santa suits was when we got to Oregon. First of all, my son didn't want the suit. I wanted him to take it, but he didn't want to. And he was too old to be an elf anymore. He got busted by somebody in a home for what can't say retarded. That's where the folks who loved the elf, but he got so big. One of the kids, the guys, said, "You're gotten real big after the years," because he was all as big as I was. Nick said, "I'm not going to be an elf anymore." And so, anyway, I lost my elf, and I started doing it in the Bemidji area, and it was like people were irritated. I'd go into the nursing homes, and they treated me with, okay, yeah, get out of here. We don't want you here. And then they wouldn't. No one would give me any gifts to give anyone. Normally I would go around to places and say, give me some stuffed animals or anything, because a lot of people in nursing homes and in the homes for kids and families that didn't have anything, they loved it when you gave them a gift. So I wasn't worried going into bad places. some of the places in Cass Lake, now, I mean, the world's changed. Welcome to the world of opioids. Welcome to the world of, people, snorting something up their nose and thinking that suddenly they see you as a demon who's got to be killed, And I ran into that just at the end of my time driving a cab. I started to see the change. But prior to that, I felt, with the Santa suit, I felt like I was the embodiment of something that is the best of people and that they would let me in. Now, I'm not so sure. I mean, look more like Santa now, but I don't feel like her. I don't have my Santa suit. It's happily going and riding around